Hello and welcome to another episode of the Curious Mind podcast. Today I deal for the third time with the phenomenon of everyday trance. Uh, I've described it as a concept that a psychologist and therapist, Stephen Wolinski, came up with. In his understanding, our daily life is dominated by us going through different kinds and different versions of trances. And this perspective is in contrast to the normal understanding of trance that usually appears in the form of hypnosis or hypnotherapy. So, according to Wolinski, our states of mind are usually more or less deep states of mind, of trance throughout our everyday lives. And this makes us to project our emotional states or the experiences that we've had in the past onto the experiences in daily life so that they become more narrow. We perceive ourselves to be more tight and rigid and are highly influenced by our projections, by our emotional states. In the last episode, then, I started to describe a more complex understanding of the everyday trance and how it works. And today I will go deeper into the psychological and philosophical foundations, into the mechanics and the design of the everyday trance so that it becomes more understandable how this freaking thing works. At the beginning, I want to clear up a misunderstanding when I talk about attitudes, emotions, and feelings and how they are essential contributions to our everyday trances. I mean to say that most of them are probably unconscious and only part of them are conscious. Especially when it comes to feelings and emotions, this can lead to misunderstandings. Emotions are usually considered to be unconscious. They can be conscious as well, whereas feelings, the term feelings, is usually reserved for the more conscious aspects of our emotional affective states. And this has been acknowledged by most psychological traditions, even if they didn't want to. So, to give a brief summary, obviously, Sigmund Freud, who also had in his education a lot of experience with hypnosis, he understood the unconscious to be the main contributor to our daily experiences. And so, for him, obviously, the unconscious and the unconscious emotions were very important. Afterwards, after him, there were psychological traditions that wanted to use as little as possible of this notion of the unconscious, but even they could not really get rid of this concept, this understanding. It is too necessary to explain our actual feelings, our actual behaviors. We cannot get away from the idea of the unconscious. So, cognitive behavioral therapy, which usually does not deal much with unconscious, it also has to concede, and it has found the term for it, which is implicit emotions. This is what they call it. Neuropsychology has the concept of subcortical emotions, which means that they assume that there are emotions which do not activate the cortex, which is the part of our brain that is mostly responsible for our conscious, differentiated life and perceptions, so that those emotions stay subcortical in the more primitive state parts of the brain, but are still affecting us. What does it mean in practice? This means that people who don't consider themselves emotional because they don't find strong feelings when they look inside themselves, they are guaranteed to be wrong. Everyone, also people who seem not to be emotional because they don't feel and they don't display many feelings, they are also guided by unconscious, or if you will, subcortical emotions. Okay, now that's that cleared up, I will now talk about the mechanics of the trance, the design of the trance. And for this, I need four important building blocks. And I will first name them, and then I will go bit by bit into those. The first bit that we need is the distinction between consciousness and the contents of consciousness. The second bit that we need is a blurred present. Obviously, I will describe what I mean with that. The third part, the third aspect that we need is a present that turns out to be the past. And the fourth one is the need to be able to make decisions quickly and robustly. All of those four parts are essentially necessary to get to come to the everyday trance as a daily, as a normal phenomenon. Okay, the first is the distinction between consciousness and the contents of consciousness. I distinguish these in the following way. The contents of consciousness is everything that can be experienced. In contrast, consciousness is the medium or the vessel in which everything that can be experienced takes place. So it's basically the distinction between the vessel, the form, and what is inside of this vessel. But this vessel is not neutral. Consciousness does not allow all kinds of and any kinds of experiences. It is structured. Consciousness, the vessel of consciousness, is structured and allows only certain experiences. Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher of the 18th century, he examined these structures of experience in the book that he wrote, The Critique of Pure Reason. And he showed that the mind cannot help but to give experiences certain forms, and he called those forms transcendental categories. Transcendental means what makes it possible to have experiences at all. And the categories are the shapes that they take. Okay, to give you some examples of those Kantian transcendental categories, one is temporality, which means we cannot help but to experience in time. We have no choice in this. This is what consciousness does. It experiences in time. Another example is spatiality. We experience in space. Quantity, that we distinguish if something is singular or we can count, there are many objects and so on. So there's the structure of quantity. Quality is another one. And the last one that I pick out, there are a dozen or so categories that he mentions. A last one that I want to mention is causality. It's normal for us to see events in the terms of cause and effect. This is not something that we choose. This is something that consciousness is offering up to us. So these categories are necessary so that in the end, all of our experiences are possible. But his transcendental categories, like the examples that I mentioned, are very abstract, they're very logical, and they're not oriented towards the psychological reality of us. The categories relevant for our daily experiences, we find them first formulated in Buddhism, which is about 2,500 years ago, in the concept of the 5 so-called khandhas. And the foreign terms that I name now are in Pali. This is the oldest Buddhist language. So there are 5 khandhas in the Buddhist texts. The first is rupa. This is the category of material phenomena. So we experience matter in terms of it being solid or liquid, that it has a temperature and movement, for example. The second category is vedana. These are feelings, so that each experience has an emotional tone and emotional underpinning. The third is sanya, which are sensory perceptions, our hearing, seeing, touch sensations, our sense of equilibrium, and so on. The fourth category is sankhara, which are it's a category of volitional phenomena, for example, interests, attitudes, intentions, longings, desires. All of this is encompassed in the category of sankhara. And the last category is vijnana, the category of consciousness. All of these, just like the Kantian transcendental categories, are, and this is how I call them, the Buddhist transcendental categories. It's not something that we choose if we want to have an emotion or if we want to have a central perception. This is how consciousness, this is how the mind, the spirit, structures our experiences. So we cannot help but have experiences of materiality, of emotionality, of sensual perception, and of will and attitude. We still need one category that is not explicitly mentioned in Kant as a category and also not in Buddhism. And we still need it to complete the puzzle, so to speak, of our normal everyday experiences, which is an ego structure. So a transcendental I. This is not the I in the sense of my personality, that I'm an extrovert or that I'm easily hurt or something like that, but it needs some kind of I. If I have an experience, a sensual experience, if I see something, this automatically refers to the experiencer, which we cannot escape this understanding that an experiencer is having an experience. This is the transcendental I, even though Kant did not include it into his categories, he still mentioned a transcendental I, and the philosophers who came directly after him, for example, Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel, who I sometimes mentioned, they also spoke of a transcendental I in their specific philosophies. So this is the last puzzle piece because it is necessary in order to reconstruct our daily experiences. Usually, just as a side note, the Buddhist khandas are not seen as a transcendental category, so you'll not find articles or YouTube videos about that. So this is a novel approach that I want to contribute, and I think it's really necessary to see it in this way because the interest of Buddhism was to describe how our experience is pieced together so that eventually it can help us to distance ourselves both from the actual experiences, but also from the categories of our experiences in the search for ultimate liberation. This is just the Buddhist perspective. Okay, so this was my first point, distinguishing the structure of consciousness from the actual contents, which is the red rose and the jealous neighbor and so on. These are the contents of consciousness which have a specific structure that is directed, that is just a feature of consciousness. The second aspect, the second of the four aspects that are necessary in order to understand the everyday trance, is the smeared presence. In order to demonstrate what I mean with that is, if you take any rapid movement, you can take your hand and wave it in front of your eyes. You can take a tennis ball. You can take cars that are moving on the road. Any kind of quick movement in front of your eyes will leave a trail behind it. It's like an echo that you see. And for the sake of simplicity, I will leave links to articles in the description of this podcast, which much more detail. Obviously, there's a lot of research, neurophysiological research that has been done about it. But let's say that this trail, this echo, is about 0.1 seconds long. This means that in our experience, the present or the moment, the present time, is not a point in time, like, for example, it is for physicists, where the present almost doesn't exist. It's immediately goes from past to future, but it's a period of time. So we cannot help but to experience the present time as a period of time. This is how the mind is constructed. William James, an early psychologist of the late 19th century, he called this the fading echo as early as 1890, in one of his publications, which is the fading echo in the apparent present. He called it the specious present, the apparent present. A phenomenologist, or in fact the founder of modern phenomenology, Edmund Husserl, he was influenced in that respect by William James, and he took the concept from James and developed it in the early 20th century. He describes that there is a primal impression in which the sensory perception enters consciousness, and this primal impression directly goes into its retention. These are terms that he coined. So one, the primal impression, and then it directly leads to its retention. Retention means that the primal impression that we have experienced right now does not disappear immediately, but fades into the background for a short time, leaving this smear behind that you see when you are carefully observing a fast moving object. So retention is not a memory in the sense that I try to recall how the car looked like that just passed in front of me. It's an integral part of the immediate perception, the conscious reliving of the immediate past. And very importantly, retention ensures that we perceive our experience as continuous and not as a flicker, as is the case, for example, with film recordings that have less than 15 frames per second. When we see such a recording with, let's say, 10 frames per second, then we don't perceive a flow, but we perceive the actual frames. And so that this doesn't happen to us, retention makes sure of the flow of our experience. The physiologists or the philosophers that deal with this specific approach, they also call it the cinematic approach, precisely because we take the metaphor of the frames per second from film and we apply it to the mind as well. And it's also called the snapshot theory for the exact same reason. So for this trail, the smearing or the retention to work, the present must additionally not only consist of snapshots that move in time, but they also must be layered on top of each other. The layers on top of each other, they allow the reacting consciousness a short thinking time before reacting. What does it mean? So, as I said before, our present time is about 0.1 seconds. This is what we experience in the 0.1 seconds. And now, slightly later, we have this bit. What moves into the future is slightly cut off. Something from the past moves a little bit into our frame. But at the same time, we have available the very piece that has just disappeared at a different layer underneath. And we perceive them at the same time. And this gives us, so to speak, a deep or a multidimensional perspective. This is how our reality feels so real, that we have many available layers at the same time. This is the basic of the smeared present. There are many publications about it. Again, you will find a link below. Just keep in mind, so you don't have to understand the precise mechanics of this or the precise numbers of this, but you have to keep in mind that the smeared present applies to all the cognitive categories. So to all the senses. So there is a smeared present, not just for the visual, but also for the auditory impressions that we have, for the touch sensations that we have, but also to all the other khandhas, all those other psychological categories that I mentioned. So this is very important for feelings, for emotions that we have. They are also smeared. They are also layered. And the same goes with memories, intentions, and so on. Okay, so this was the second aspect that is necessary to understand for the everyday trance, the smeared present. The third aspect is the present that turns out to be the past. Husserl, the same phenomenologist of the beginning of the 20th century, he worked out an important consequence of retention, or the smeared present, namely that our perceived present is actually always a perception of the immediate past. This is, I think, clear if you understand a little bit about how our brain works. In order to create a conscious experience, there has to be a little bit, at least, of a processing. So that even though time moves forward, all our psychological reality actually takes place in the immediately past, right? It's as if I'm moving forward, but I'm going backwards, so that I don't see what is happening next to me, which would be the actual present. I don't have access to the actual present. And for sure, I don't see what is ahead of me. So I have no actual experience of the future, even if it seems to be. So when someone throws a ball at me and I seem to see how this ball will move forward towards me, this is just a reconstruction of the mind. I am not seeing the future. What I see is the anticipation of the future. So, what I basically actually see walking backwards is like a waterfall of the immediate past. I see the earliest available immediate past, and then I see the retention of it. This, let's say for simplicity, 0.1 seconds of the past. So the present and the future are in principle unattainable for us. But since we have to survive, the organism has to construct a rough version of the present and of the future so that it allows us to navigate the reality, our relationships, our family, work, needs for security, and so forth. So the mind is creating a reality that pretends for us to be in the present. It pretends that we can accurately anticipate the future. We live towards a future that we seem to see, but what it actually does is to take the data of immediately past events to create this reality or this illusionary reality. This is not only a philosophical insight from works of Husserl, for example, or psychologists or brain researchers who came after him, but we can also gain this insight through very sensitive observation. And this is precisely what Buddhist insight or Vipassana meditation is about, the precise observation of the experienced present. One of these levels, and there have been described many levels in the development of Vipassana insight, one of these levels in insight is called the knowledge of dissolution. You can read about it in a book that is published, The Progress of Insight, by a meditation master, Burmese meditation master, Mahasi Sayadaw, who was the eminent Vipassana teacher of the 20th century. But this was already described in the meditation manual from the 5th century. So in the Buddhism that followed after the immediate phase of early Buddhism, in the so-called Visuddhimagga, translated The Path of Purity. I will also leave a link for that work in the description. So the knowledge of these insight stages has been there all along, as long as people have done those very precise, very subtle insight Vipassana meditations. The stage, the knowledge of dissolution, is a stage in which the meditator sees that everything that is experienced in an instantaneous is an instantaneous passing. So that everything just flows away and gets dissolved into the past. And this direct, immediate realization, it triggers, so the text, an instinctive fear or panic, because it is seen by the meditator not just as an intellectual concept, but as an inescapable truth. In one of my own long-term meditation retreats, I reached this stage once. And not only did my experience dissolve into this waterfall in the immediate past, this was my experience, but also the experience of my own self, of the observer, which is, of course, a special case of experience. So both the experienced content, but also the observer, this transcendental I, the transcendental ego, also this was falling away in the waterfall. And so there arose in me, as a consequence of this, an instinctive and instinctual deep fear, because it became clear in this moment that there is nothing to cling to, neither attitudes, nor insights, nor images of myself or the world. Everything is this waterfall of disillusion. And there's only the eternally passing immediate past. Now, this insight, I keep this memory of it, but it needed this long-term retreat to get there. So for me now, this is just a past insight. I cannot just go there, I cannot just reach it. But probably this is good for daily life because it's pragmatic, it's practical to keep the illusion alive that I'm living in the present moment. Okay, so we have to anticipate the future based on the past available to us, and then adjust the calculation. This is what the mind unconsciously does, or the brain, depending on how you see it. We adjust the calculation of our reality based on how good our projection was. And this calculation or anticipation can only be based, as I pointed out, on the past and specifically on pattern recognition, because it's safer to make prediction based on past patterns than to make prediction based on single events. And this means that we are already knee-deep in the projection of our inner world, because the main function of this inner world is to deal with the limitation of our access to the outside world, which means to anticipate and interpret the present and the future based on our past. This is why we are usually glad when we can identify laws or patterns through experience or through intense reflection that were true in the past and might be true in the future, whether our interpretations are based on scientific methods or intuitive methods. No matter how we do it, no matter how we look into the past, find patterns and apply them to the present and to the future, they have one thing in common. Consequential predictions take up a lot of our conscious capacity. This applies to small children when they try to stand up. You can see it in their faces and the whole body, how concentrated they are. They're trying to do something that for us is trivial, but for them, they are approaching something new, something that they cannot confidently do. So they reserve a lot of conscious capacity to that activity, to be able to stand up, to be able to crawl, to be able to walk. They obviously, they do it partly with whatever available consciousness that they have, but they have to rely on this very basic functions like movement. They have to rely on muscle memory as well, a lot. And this applies just as much to the development of adult features like the theory of relativity, recognizing red flags when you're dating, or when making complex management decisions at work. When we face a new problem, a lot of the capacity of our mind is consumed by it. We try to activate all the available experience or memory that we have, try to project it onto the problem, the issue that we face right now, and we hope that something sticks. And if it doesn't, we have to rethink, reassess, create new hypotheses, and try them again. If I fall down by balancing on the left foot, maybe I will try the right foot. This is the intuitive process that the child does. This is the intuitive process that we do also as adults. Okay, so far so good. I think it does make sense if you see it that way, that we have to rely on our past experiences in order to project them onto the created reality, the fabricated reality of the present and the anticipation of the future. But this does not make clear yet why we are so irrational sometimes, and especially when we develop mental issues, when we're depressed, when we are anxious, because so far everything seems to just make sense. So we need the fourth aspect in order to create this everyday trance that can turn dysfunctional. We need to be able to make decisions quickly and robustly, even if we make mistakes. In order to be able to consciously make those complex considerations about the future, about works, relationship, and ourselves, like I said, we need to ensure that we do not simply freeze during those complex calculations, like a robot whose working memory is overloaded. We need to be able to function and to make decisions in spite of this. In other words, the countless small decisions that we have to make in order to proceed in the flow of life, the things that we say in the moment, the things that we do, how we work, how we survive in general, it requires an extremely quick process with assessments, judgments, and evaluations that have immediate access to all our past experiences and does not use up a lot of the conscious capacity. Because whether we have all our, differentiated problem solving skills available or not, we still have to be able to walk, to quickly assess the danger of a situation, to quickly react in a conversation. All of these things have to, we rely on them being available even on autopilot when we're half asleep, when we're barely there. And because this process has to ensure our quick ability to act, our spontaneous, instantaneous ability to act, it's better for it to be undifferentiated, rough and flawed, a crude but very robust process. And for that, this is what needs to be ensured. And for that, we need precisely the unconscious emotions. They construct a rough fantasy world that is robust, that helps us to structure what we are seeing, that helps us to differentiate what I should focus on and what not. When I'm crossing the street, I'm filtering out the houses and the balconies and so on, and I'm focusing on the movement of the cars. I'm not paying attention to the kids. I'm walking next to me. I'm not paying attention to the color of the tram. I'm focusing on very specific aspects of my experience. And this filtering, even though I might not perceive it so, is based on an emotional assessment of the situation that tells me, that signifies to me what is currently important and keeps me alert so that I can quickly, on reflex, on autopilot, react to the situation. So in this category fall also the basic beliefs about me, about the world, about people. They help us to structure social experiences. The same with attitudes and emotions that help me to further condense my reactions to the challenges of the outside world. And these are precisely the aspects that accompany our everyday trance. And this is what gets in the way of our attempt to develop a healthy perception of the world and of ourselves. Why? Because it's necessary that I have a quick perception. And the quick perception is not necessarily a healthy perception. Okay, I will stop at this point. To sum it up very briefly, and this is very condensed, all of the 4 points that I mentioned that are necessary for everyday trance. You will find whole books written of them. They have not been put together as I relate them to you now. They are researched in separate ways. For me, this is the attempt to make sense of the everyday trance and to explain to you what aspects of our conscious and unconscious phenomena are necessary ingredients for that. To sum it further up, what I told you just now, in a world without a present, because we can only perceive the immediate past, the organism creates an experienced, blurred present. This is the time period that you experience as a time present, that contains a buffer of a short reflection period. We need this time period so that the reacting consciousness has the material available that it can react to, in order to create the fantasy of a reality, because again, we don't perceive the present time, we don't perceive a reality. This is all concepts that the structure of the mind is imposing on our unconnected experiences, based on the experiences of the past, in which the fantasized individual, because also I am an object in the world that the mind is creating, so that the fantasized individual can navigate his or her life. Okay, I think this was complex enough. If you're interested in details, look up the links that I offered you in the description. Re-listen to some of the passages if you didn't get them the first time. And obviously, there is one important question that I have not addressed yet in detail, namely exactly how the emotions do this and why the emotions do this, why it is so robust, tough to change, and misleading at the same time. And this will be the content of the next episode. I hope that you have understood enough of this kind of abstract level so that you can follow and understand the next piece, which will make sense of how emotions work. And then in the episode after that, I will finally come to the point how we can minimize the influence of dysfunctional daily trances. In the description, you will also find a link to conversations that I offer for free as kind of sneak previews for therapies that you might be interested in to have with me. Now, obviously, in the therapies, I don't go into the abstract theoretical depths of those contents that I've mentioned to you, but the learning experience from this, the fact that we are usually trapped in everyday trances and how to get out of it. Of course, this also is part of the therapies that I conduct because I think that they are essential as tools to understand and to apply when we want to take ourselves out of depressive, anxious, less confident states where we feel that we are not loved, not worthy, and so on. Those phenomena of everyday trances, they are included in this. And so I use the practical aspect of what I have described today in the therapy sessions. So if you're interested in that, follow the link in the description there. I hope it was interesting to you. Let me know if you have specific questions or comments, and I hope to see you next time. See you then.